Welcome. Today we're going to look at the palette knife in ArtRage, and it works the same way it would in the natural world, but we have an extra advantage in that we have digital uses for it also. Now I'm going to start with a base drawing, and this is one of them that I use. So this is not going to be a skin tone tutorial. So it's just about blending. So we're going to look at the different tools. Here we start with the flat blade. And the flat blade is used to smear paint. Now all of the tools I'm showing you aren't going to be applicable for blending skin. They have other uses, but I'm just showing you what they do. So here you can see it's just kind of moving the paint around. This is the way a natural palette knife would work. It's just using the flat of the blade to smear paint. So I can change that by changing the loading, how much paint is loaded on it. So you can select or deselect auto clean to determine whether the knife is clean after you use it or not. Okay, next we're moving on to the edge blade. And this is similar. It acts the way a palette knife would in real life. It's just using the edge of the blade to move paint around. So it creates fine lines, fine smeary lines. So now we're using the soft blade, and this is a digital effect that lets you use paint, and you're moving the paint around to blend them together. So now we're going to move on to blur, which creates a digital blurring effect similar to Gaussian blur in Photoshop. Now I have to increase the softness, so now you can see more of a blurring effect happening here. Now I'm using the wet, and this is my favorite one because it simulates actually adding water to help blend the paints together. And this is the one I go to the most often for blending skin tones. So here you see how easily the colors come together very smoothly, but it still doesn't have an artificial look which blending creates. It still looks kind of natural. Now here, again, we're using the same base for each of the tools, and this is not normally the way I will paint skin because I use different layers. I'll use yellow or red underneath, and that I will show you in another tutorial. As in some previous tutorials, you've already seen how I've used that if you go back to look at some of the previous ones. And so because I'm just using these flat colors that I have here, it doesn't give a very lifelike look because the skin is made up of a lot of different colors and tones. It's not just one flat color, and so that's why this looks kind of lifeless. But you can still, but the whole purpose is to show you how to blend, because I would have this on other layers and I use kind of a glazing effect so you can see through to the other layers. Okay, now we're going to move on to some of the presets. So here we're starting with blurred frosting, and this is pretty nice. It gives a little bit of a texture. It is blurred. I'm making it a little, I did one cheek with a large brush and I'm doing the other cheek with a small brush, and that's what I'll do throughout so you can see the difference. And you can go back in. Now another thing I don't normally do is don't have all my colors on one layer, like I would have the hair on another layer and the skin on another layer, so you see some of the hair bleeding through, and that's going to happen as we go through. But this does a pretty nice job, the blurred frosting. So this is the presets that I'm using now. And this is different from the 5 basic knives. These are all specialty settings that are based on the palette knife. So yeah, this gives a pretty good effect, and I like the little texture that it leaves. Now let's move on to the next, which is frost. So this makes a big frosting effect, almost as if I'm looking through frosted glass. So it completely obliterates some of the highlights, so I have to make the brush smaller, the palette knife smaller, so I can keep some of the highlights there, and that seems to work better. So I can go in and do some detailing with here. So here's another contender. Again, you can use these, and with these presets, you can use them to create a style of blending out of. Yeah, so the smaller one gives me a little bit more control. And I'm doing these quickly here for the tutorial purpose, but I would do a lot more work if I was doing this as a final. So here we're using the frosted spots. So I'm changing the brush size there. And again, it gives the effect of looking through frosted glass, and which is something that could be useful. And also leaves a nice texture. Again, making this brush size small. I'm saying brush size even though it's a knife, but I'm used to saying brush size. So if I say that, know that I'm talking about the palette knife. So even like what it does in the hair here, especially for black hair, it doesn't have a smooth look, and this would be pretty interesting for creating curls. And now this is the hard out smudge. So I'm making the hard out smudge smaller. See if I can get some more control. And as you can see, the cursor looks different too. It's actually showing you a hard edge inside the round circle. So letting you know what direction you're going in. So now I'm trying the hard wet blender, similar to the wet tool. And this works pretty good also. Can change the sizes using big size on one cheek and making it smaller on the opposite cheek, just to see the difference in the control of the tool. So here's another good contender for blending with the skin. So now we're using heavy blurred frosting. And here's another one that's good. It's not leaving as much frosting as I would have thought for something heavy. I guess it's heavy on the blurred and not heavy on the frosting. But this is another contender for using the blend skin. Gives a pretty nice effect. And yes, never try to use just one size. Always change the size of the brush depending on the part of the face you're on. If you're under the eye, you want to use a smaller brush size. And if you're on the side of the face, you can use a larger brush size. So vary it as you need, depending on the space or coverage that you're going for, or the amount of paint that you are blending. Okay, here's small frost. And again, I'm liking what I'm seeing here. Gives a nice little texture. You have a nice little automatic texture. And this is another thing that's good about ArtRage. You don't get that flat digital look because again, I have texture on my canvas and I'm getting texture here with the palette knife. And the skin is not just one flat thing, it does have texture, it does have pores. So this is a way to simulate that without adding over top of it or as an overlay or underneath it. You actually add in the texture with the brush, with the palette knife. So sometimes I realize I'm saying brush and palette knife. Getting better at it, even though it's toward the end. So here's Tiny Frost. There's a really nice job there. I like the way that looks. Again, changing the size from cheek to cheek to see how a big size works as opposed to a small size on the other cheek. Blending the skin together. So yeah, this is definitely another contender too to use for your blending of skin tones. And again, don't be too caught up with the flat, lifeless look right now, because again, this is not the way I normally color skin, with everything just on one layer and just one set of colors. I use complementary colors, use blue to cool the shadows, use some warm colors, in the highlight parts. Tiny Frost, and with the base underneath. So you see how the base fills in what's taken away from the edges. Okay, so as I was saying, so you can compare. I'm going to make the ArtRage file available for you. I'm going to leave that in the link below, and so you can download that and look at the actual ArtRage file and see how these compare side by side for yourself. So that's it for today. And remember, just create.